collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, the banning of single-use plastics has been in the European pipeline for years, but with implementation just weeks away, here in Cyprus, businesses are demanding a deferment.
Already the situation about the one-use plastic has been in the pipeline for 5 years at the EU level, and GEVE and OEF are very organised and they follow up on these.
And has the Health Ministry had a change of heart after sending young patients who aren't registered with the NHS for the AstraZeneca vaccine, despite recommending that it should not be given to people under 50 years old?
The Ministry also says that there is an alternative for people who prefer not to have the AstraZeneca vaccine, that they will basically call them on an alternate days when they have the Pfizer or the Moderna available.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about the environment. If you're a regular listener, you'll know that several years ago in Brussels, I spoke to the MEP who was behind the ban on plastic bags. And I see in the newspaper this week here in Cyprus that businesses are expecting an extension to the July 3rd deadline to ban single-use plastics here. So I'm joined on the programme by the Deputy President of the Green Party here in Cyprus, Effie Xanthou. Effie, can you put a timeline on this? Because I've seen you quoted as saying that it's very unlikely that we'll be able to meet this July the 3rd deadline because Parliament still have to discuss this.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me on your programme. The thing is that with all the kerfuffle that is happening right now with the President of the Parliament, we won't actually have the committees ready to start discussing anything until end of June. And we've got this specific legislation hasn't even been submitted to Parliament. I'm actually hoping that it's ready, and it's just a matter of us, having a first plenary for it to be submitted. We won't know until the 10th of June. So I find that it's unlikely that we will have the legislation to actually discuss it. And even if we do, they will have to give a grace period because it's extremely late. So we are going to be losing the deadline of the 3rd of July, and we'll have to probably pay a fine for delaying the implementation of the specific legislation.
Well, as I said in the introduction, this has been in the pipeline for several years. I think the first, certainly single-use plastic bags, was back in 2018 that it was discussed in Europe, because I was there. And this was a follow-on from that. So it's 2019, I think this was first introduced. What did the last Parliament do? Surely the Environment Committee and the relevant committees have looked at this, discussed it. Why hasn't it gone for voting?
Well, that's the thing. They haven't, because legislation was supposed to be created because of the directive, and it was never created. Now, I'll remind our listeners that we tried to introduce legislation that had to do with banning the use of plastic bags in supermarkets even before there was a directive. And both the majority of the other parliamentarians and the government refused to have a legislative proposal from a party to introduce this. We had to wait for the bureaucracy to come through, which came through again last minute, and that's why we had a 6-month grace period for the plastic bags as well. I really have to say that all these delays that are coming around with all the environmental legislation does seem to be a bit much of a coincidence, everything being delayed. I mean, we're supposed to be discussing about the pay-as-you-throw system, and it was discussed in Parliament, and it was delayed until after the elections. After the elections means that you have a new committee members, probably a new committee president, so you're going to start from scratch again. We have a legislation that has been submitted that will demand recycling at the source, which basically means that every single individual and company and restaurant and hotel and whatnot will have to separate their garbage before disposing of them. And again, this has been in the pipeline for many years now. I remember discussing it in a public hearing in 2012, to be honest with you, and this is like 2021. It just seems like anything that has to do with the environment gets extremely delayed from this and previous governments.
But is this the way we expect Parliament to run? They're there to pass legislation, and if they take long enough to do it, we could get to the next elections and be in the same boat again.
I don't want to be a defender of Parliament, because usually they are the ones that are that are delaying things, and there's a lot of procrastination happening. But in this specific case, all these environmental legislations that I'm talking about have been delayed in being submitted to Parliament. Like, for instance, the pay-as-you-throw system was only submitted to Parliament in March, and they only started discussing it at that time. And it was impossible that it would have been finished. They really tried to have it finished until end of April, which would have been the deadline, because they always cease every session a month before elections. And it was impossible to reach a consensus. So, yeah, that's why it's being delayed. But the two other legislations that I'm mentioning, they haven't even been submitted to Parliament to be discussed.
All right, but then I also see that the people at GESY, the Cyprus Chamber of Commerce, have been saying that some of their members say that it's absolutely unfair. And last year, one company imported 1 million plastic cups with their logo on. Now, I'm sorry, surely, if you run a business, are well aware that this is in the pipeline. So why do you go and do that?
Especially if you're in a business that demands 1 million cups to be pre-ordered from abroad and being imported. It is impossible that they don't know. And GESY definitely knows about this, and OF definitely knows about this, because already the situation about the one-use plastic has been in the pipeline for 5 years at the EU level. And GESY and OF are very organised, and they follow up on these. Now, having said this, I will admit that there hasn't been enough campaigning happening from the Department of Environment, because people should have been more aware that this was imminent. And it does have to do with a lot of the lackings that the specific department has, despite the fact that I do agree with them that the Attorney General's office has been extremely lacking in being thorough with this legislation and bringing things through in a timely manner.
Of course, consumers can also play a big part, and they have done in many cases like this. I mean, if I go to a coffee shop, which I don't do very often, but I take my own reusable straw with me, and I very firmly give them back their plastic straw if that's what they've got, and I ask them why they're still using them. And we have seen that some outlets have started to replace plastic cutlery, plastic plates, plastic straws with more environmentally friendly options, and I know a lot of people who actually won't go to the businesses that are insisting on still using plastic. Do we need to be more proactive as citizens about that? Mm-hmm. To force Parliament, in a sense, through businesses to get on with it?
Yes, I do believe that you're right. It's one of the reasons that we started a campaign as Cyprus Greens. It's one of the reasons that many of the environmental organisations have started campaigns against one-use plastic. I mean, everybody has seen at least one ad about how every plastic straw, every plastic cup, every cigarette butt ends up back in our food chain, or ends up in the beaches or on the beaches where we're swimming. There is an effort in trying to reduce one-use anything. But we had COVID in March of 2020, and suddenly everything was reversed, because all the cafes went back to only using one-use plastics because of supposed health reasons. We actually had a fight 2 days ago again in the House of Parliament, because it seems that they refused to reverse their policy of using one-use plastics, even though by end 2019 we had arranged for them to buy a lot of the glassware that they would have needed to be able to facilitate all the guests that they have in Parliament. And suddenly we're back to one-use plastic, and that's everywhere. We had campaigns where cafes would offer a small reduction in the price of coffee if you brought your own reusable.
Well, that's the obvious. I was about to say the obvious
a small
example,
incentive which actually works. And I'll have to tell you that during the COVID period, I only found 2 of these cafes maintaining this. All the others had gone back to their one-use plastic because they were too scared of the COVID ordinance, and they basically, the employees find it a lot easier to just toss everything out rather than having to put them in a dishwasher, dry them out, and then reuse them.
Well, perhaps if they have to pay for the disposal of all of this plastic, they might see that it is actually more sensible from a purely financial point of view to say, bring your own cup or glass, we will fill it, we will discount you, and they don't even need to discount you as much as they would have paid for the plastic to be disposed. Yes. So it's a business decision, really, isn't it?
You would think so. But I do find that a lot of good ideas just don't get implemented because people just are so used to things and they're resistant to change. But in this specific aspect, that's why I connected the legislation that has to do with recycling at the source with this policy. Because when that cafeteria, when that restaurant is going to have to pay for every single bag of trash that they're throwing out, you bet you that they're going to be recycling things. And it will be easier if they have less things to recycle or to separate from their garbage if they give incentives to people to actually bring their own.
And of course we should add here that as far as I'm aware, a lot of these plastic items are at the moment certainly not accepted by Green Dot, and I don't know of anybody who does recycle some of these plastic items in Cyprus.
Well, that's another question, because it's not that they're not recyclable. It's the fact that the specific company refuses to recycle them. So all the municipalities and local authorities will actually have to come up with a different scheme. Or they'll have to pay Green Dot to actually take on these extra items that they refuse to recycle right now. Or they'll have to set up a totally new system. Because I have to remind people that Green Dot is a company that was created by importers and by producers of packaging in Cyprus. So they're only responsible for actually recycling packaging. Anything else that is recyclable is not something that they are forced by law to actually recycle. So they want an incentive as well. They demand payment from municipalities.
They already get paid by the importers of the packaging, and they also now, as I'm sure you're aware, ask the various muhtars, villages and other people to pay a per capita fee on top of that. So they're already getting paid twice for recycling the items that they do recycle.
I'm not aware of this unless Green Dot has actually decided that they will start recycling everything and they will want payment for it, because it's not their purview. The money that they're supposed to be getting from importers and from producers are only the amount of money that is needed to recycle that percentage of the things that they are importing. And it's like if they reach a 10% recycling of all packaging waste, it's considered to be okay. So again, we go back to the legislation where we have to see where the problem is, because Green Dot is actually mentioned in the legislation in the polluter pays legislation. So we need to see what kind of adjustments need to be done there. But in general, on the whole, seeing the program as it is applied right now in Aglanja, the pay-as-you-throw system, you realize that you have to give an outlet to people. You're asking them to separate their garbage and recycle, and they're paying €2 for every big dustbin bag that they're utilizing. That's a lot of money if you're not recycling. If you're recycling, it's just fine. I think that a lot of people are going to have a pretty pleasant surprise at the end of the year if they were diligent in recycling and composting. But for those that aren't, or for those that do want to be very diligent with their recycling as well, it means that a lot of stuff doesn't get recycled, and they have to put it in the trash. You mentioned coffee cups. I'll mention the straws from coffee, the utensils, the plastic utensils that are being used. Now, these are things that are supposed to be banned, but with the extension that we're giving, it might be another year and a half before these items stop appearing in our households.
In the meantime, have we banned their import at least, so that we can't have the same question asked by the importers next year saying, oh, but I've imported X million of these and it's not fair if I can't use them. Surely the first thing to do is to ban the import now, and then by the time the legislation goes through, if it ever does, then there won't be stocks for people to make an excuse to carry this on even further.
But that's the thing. The legislation is the one that has the ban in it, which is why there's going to be a grace period of maybe 6 months. When the legislation comes through about banning one-use plastics, that's where you have the ban on creating them and importing them. And you're giving 6 months grace period for people to get rid of their stock.
I still say that the ban should be on importing them from this date, and then you have the grace period to use up the stock you already imported, because it's nonsense to extend the ability to import more just because it wasn't separated in the original legislation.
No, it's not about separating it. They came together because it was logical that they should have come together. We should have passed this legislation 2 years ago. And we could have said that from this date forward, imports are banned, and then from this date forward, you're not allowed to sell them. And that would have been the grace period. But Cypriots think that they're cleverer than other people, so they extended as much as they could without any legislation whatsoever. They're going to give a 6 months period now, so which means that the specific industries are actually going to, gain from this, because they can sell anything for the next 6 months, and then it remains in circulation for at least a year and a half after. Because if you're going to buy plastic utensils and plastic plates for the kiddies party, or you're going to have a million cups being imported because you're a business, you're a cafeteria, and you think that it's much cheaper to import those rather than getting the paper cups or getting other reusable or compostable material, you're just going to import as much as you can store.
Well, we have to say that hopefully, our new Parliament will look rather more closely at the way some of this legislation is put together, because it really is a no-brainer, if you ask me, that you have all these discrepancies, which mean basically that we get away without implementing things that we all know we should have implemented at least probably a year ago.
Well, hope springs eternal, Rosie.
Efik Xanthou, Vice President of the Green Party here in Cyprus.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
COVID vaccinations continue apace here in Cyprus, and we're joined on this week's programme by the gentleman who set up a vaccination centre at the University of Nicosia's Medical School. He is Anastasis Shoftanos. Anastasis, thanks for joining me. Now, I know that you particularly are dealing with people who are not able to access the vaccination portal, because to do that you have to be signed up and registered with our national health system. So can you tell us who the people are that you're dealing with and what you've been doing?
So basically at the University of Nicosia Medical Center, we just wanted to help out with regards to increasing the capacity for the vaccination, so that we finish with this the vaccination as soon as possible. So we are volunteers at the center. We open on the weekends, and we asked the Ministry of Health to be they are basically sending us patients who, as you said, are not registered with GESY, but they want to be vaccinated, so they declare an interest in getting vaccinated, and they send us lists every week, and we vaccinate these people. Now, these people, non-GESY beneficiaries, can find out how to get on this list, basically through the PIO portal on coronavirus. And basically, you have to be on the lookout, because guidelines and information change every day. At the moment, it's a form that you fill in from the PIO website, and you send an application as a non-GESY beneficiary, and then these people are sent to us, and we vaccinate them on the weekends.
Right, now let's talk a little bit about what you vaccinate them with, because there's been quite a lot of discussion, both in social media and in the press here, about the fact that these mostly foreigners, I think they're all foreigners, are going to be given only the AstraZeneca vaccine. And that was a little bit strange when we then heard from the Ministry of Health that it shouldn't be given to certain categories of people, which could include some of the people who are coming to your medical centre for vaccination on the weekend. So you, I think, have been very careful to make sure that all the people who do come to the medical school are properly informed. Can you enlighten us?
Yes, basically, after the announcement by the Minister of Health that as the Ministry of Cyprus recommends that people under the age of 50 should not have the AstraZeneca vaccine because of, as we know, the risk of clotting. Basically, we spoke to the ministry before they sent us the people because the majority of people were under the age of 50 that we had on the first weekend, at least after the announcement. So the recommendation from the ministry was that the under 50 age is a recommendation, but the choice is after having an informed consent from the patient. So as a medical school center, we made sure that every single patient who came, we informed them about this announcement, we informed them about the risks, but also the fact that, well, it is a recommendation. Now, the thing is, the ministry also said that there is an alternative for people who prefer not to have the AstraZeneca vaccine, that they will basically call them on an alternate days when they had the Pfizer or the Moderna available. Now, this procedure is new, things are changing. Obviously, with our patients that they're coming in, we have to explain to them that it's a recommendation because these recommendations change daily. I mean, certain countries at the moment, for example, Greece, Germany, they are still vaccinating all age groups with the AstraZeneca. Now, however, it's very, very important that people are aware, and especially, as you said, because a lot of these people are from foreign countries, so basically they may not have heard the announcement, they may not be aware, so it's paramount that we inform them before they make an informed choice, basically. But we have to emphasize to people that getting vaccinated is our only shield against this pandemic, because if we don't, then the mutations, the virus will continue circulating in the community. And that's why we try to help. To help as much as we can with the vaccination process.
Well, and we don't want people to panic because in actual fact the risk is minute, isn't it, of getting these blood clots. But at the same time one can understand, particularly people who have underlying medical problems, that they may be very wary of getting a particular type of vaccine because if you read the newspapers and so on, you do know who's got a risk of what.
Yes. Especially for people who are at risk of clotting, then obviously it would be best not to have the AstraZeneca, especially if they're young female. It's a certain profile. But to be honest with you, as far as I know at least, there is no sort of pathophysiological explanation to how these clots happen. And as you said, the risk is quite small. People shouldn't panic because the risk will be less than 1 in 100,000 or 1 in 200,000. So basically what we have to start thinking is what is our risk with the actual catching corona and what is our risk with regard to getting vaccinated. Now the thing is, with all vaccinations, everything that we do, there is a risk. Even when you go out in the streets and you walk or you drive, there is a risk. So any pills you take, even paracetamol, Panadol, or Nurofen, anything, there is a risk that we take. So we have to weigh up our risks and our benefits and then make an informed decision. And that's the most important because things are changing all day long. One day it's this announcement, next day it's the next announcement. Okay? But people shouldn't panic.
Well, I think we should applaud you for this business of emphasising the informed decision. Now, we spoke earlier in the week when we were going to set up this chat, and I mentioned that a couple of people who fell into this non-GESY category, who had underlying medical conditions and had actually contacted the ministry, had been told it was tough luck and they got the AstraZeneca or nothing. I've got good news because I've heard from one of them that the ministry has actually contacted them, cancelled the AstraZeneca vaccine appointment and told them that at some point in the future they will be offered Pfizer. So maybe the work of the medical school and the fact that you queried the ministry on this has had a good fallout.
I don't know if they did it on their own accord, actually, but to be honest with you, it's the right thing to do. I mean, given that the recommendation is that under 50s people with clotting, but the main recommendation is for people under 50 at the moment. But as you said, things are changing. It's a personal choice. We are very happy that in Cyprus at least people were given a choice. In other countries they haven't been given a choice, and now this choice is extended to the non-GESY people, which is very, very important.
And you mentioned, of course, the importance of hurrying the rollout as fast as we can, and these sort of problems are actually slowing it down. And you also mentioned about the under 50s, and it's mostly, I think, the under 50s who still haven't received the vaccine.
Yes, for different reasons, basically, because obviously the people in their 20s, they don't feel that anything will happen to them if they contract the coronavirus. But to be honest with you, what we have to realize is that even if nothing happens to them, the fact that it's going to be circulating in the community is not only a risk to the other people, but also to themselves in the future, because if it mutates in the future, if it keeps circulating, we don't know the new strain, if it's going to be more dangerous even for younger people. And there have been instances where younger people had really adverse events.
And we've heard about new mutations this very week. So as a doctor, do you think it's likely that come autumn or next winter, we're probably going to need another booster vaccine that will deal with mutations?
Up to now, we're lucky enough that from what the companies are saying, all the mutations which are out are covered by the vaccines, which is good. Now, if we hurry and this is what we are trying as well, if we hurry the vaccination effort, at least the bank of the virus in the community, the spread of the community will be so low everywhere. It doesn't matter. It has to be not only in Cyprus, but it's all over the world. It's high all over the world, so that they stop this ongoing mutations. Because now, with regards to the booster shot, probably we will need a third dose, like a booster shot, in the autumn, or it may not be for a new strain, but it may just be to augment the antibodies we already have. There were some suggestions in the UK that coming autumn they will start with doses already. But people shouldn't panic about new strains. It's a normal evolution of the virus. The main thing is that we stop it. We try and be as fast as we can.
And of course that means getting vaccinated. But we should tell anybody who's listening to this, particularly if they haven't been following events on the news, to check out when they do apply to the Ministry of Health, because I think the people in GESY, they get in through the portal, they know what they want, they get the choice. But everybody else who hasn't been given a choice, particularly if they're aware of underlying health conditions, should think very carefully and certainly inform the ministry, should they not, about the underlying health conditions and ask if it's possible to have an alternative.
Yeah, of course. And they're giving them that alternative now as the vaccines are being rolled out, and that's what I'm happy about.
Well, it's good news on the vaccination front. Thank you very much indeed for joining me, Anastasis Shovdanos from the University of Nicosia Medical Centre.
Thank you.
In other news this week, the former Bishop of Kitium will appear at the end of the month before Larnaca District Court on charges of indecent assault against an underage woman. Now, he's already appeared in court earlier this year on rape charges, but his lawyer appeared before the court on Tuesday to argue that the elderly cleric, he's 83, can't follow the court proceedings because of diminished mental faculties. So an expert has been appointed by the Mental Health Services to examine this issue, and when that's been dealt with, then perhaps the bishop will appear in court to face those charges. Reports surfaced this week as well from the Health Insurance Organisation saying that some medical professionals are going to possibly be dropped from the general health system, known here as GESY, for trying to cheat the system. They're investigating fraud allegations against a doctor, a mental health company, a pharmacy and a clinical lab. The Acting Director General of the Health Insurance Organisation urged patients to check their emails, or if they haven't been doing that, of course, they could check their medical records, because every service given by the National Health Service, or GESY, is logged and can appear in their medical records, and they get an email so they can check whether they did indeed receive the treatment. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.